various revenue sources totaling, you know, 10, $14 million year to year. And then we're seeing also an amalgamation of various expenses. And just like water, it's hard to tell if we're properly tracking the water supply charge when we look at these tables. Um, if you're following what I'm saying, then is that 3.4 gets lumped in with lots of other money, that money gets spent. And I'm not sure how these tables are allowing us to execute our charge of concisely tracking the water supply charge and where those funds are being spent. Do
Right.
you catch my drift on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And, in some respects, the easiest would be to just have one line item that says water supply charge 3.4 million and one line item that says project expenditures at 11.4, or I guess in this case, 10.8 in the gray box. And then say, there you have it. The water supply charge is not in excess of the water supply hard costs. So don't cloud it with direct personnel and direct supplies and services and other things. That would be a simple world. I think that what we're doing here is we're really showing you, we've got basically three cost centers or three funds: water supply, mitigation, and water demand. And so the water demand covers all the conservation programs and permitting. The mitigation covers all the environmental stewardship issues, and water supply covers everything related to the water supply function, which is then can make it even more cloudy. Some of the pieces of things that don't seem like they're water supply, like OPEB reserve and pension reserve, well, it gets an allocation of our overall pension and OPEB reserves as each cost center does. So yeah, you in some respects, John, you're getting too much information. And then this becomes kind of the underpinnings of the letter I sent to you in reply to your inquiry to us about having built up reserves and so forth. And so to date, the most recent years, we've actually been subsidizing the water supply function with all these other sources of revenue. And so we're kind of showing you all the revenues and all the expenditures related to water supply. But yeah, it becomes problematic for the reasons I told you. It's almost too much information.
Suresh, when you're doing the accounting on this, I would think that you have a ledger for the water supply charge itself, both debits and credits to that account. Is that accurate? And if so, what are the debits? How do the debits tend to appear on that account? Are they specific to the uses of those funds, or are they more generic in how they're distributed?
No, so basically the GL would basically show a credit coming into the revenue side, which would be the water supply charge fund or the water supply charge revenue. And then the debits are going to be all of the expenses related to the water supply charge fund. And so basically you won't see a GL. On the revenue side, yes, you see a GL account that basically captures the water supply revenue. There's no question about that. That's clear cut. On the expenses side, no, there isn't a specific GL line item that will show that what's hitting the water supply charge revenue, because as Dave said, the water supply charge revenue is a component of the water supply charge fund. And so basically that gets dumped with the water supply charge fund.
Or just water supply fund, yeah.
Water supply fund.
Okay, so the accounting is such that in the accounting piece, all of these dollars are lumped together as it is, but not just on this spreadsheet, but how you function with your accounting system.
Correct. I mean, this is a spreadsheet. We kind of like we basically recreate this using the numbers from our GL, but you won't be able to find a specific report like this. We have to kind of like split it out between the cost centers.
Excuse me, Suresh. I would like to check with call-in. We have a caller, and I'm going to unmute the caller Could you please identify yourself?
Are you hearing me?
Yes, Jason, is this Jason Campbell?
Yes, it is. I
Okay.
finally, yeah, it was all the links that came in my email about this meeting did not function, so I finally found the phone number on the agenda.
Okay,
So
Jason,
that's
thank
the
you.
only way I could get into this meeting. Yep.
I'm going to keep your mic open so that you can comment. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can,
Oh,
John.
okay, thanks. I just had a question on the user fee. How do you decide to put 720 or 610 of user fee money into the water supply budget when it has user fee collections of over 5 million? And that goes back to Dave's letter back to John as to what's the user fee really for? Without that user fee, we wouldn't have had to borrow, or the bottom line would not have been a deficit on the letter that Dave wrote back to John. I'm just a little concerned. I mean, there's a lot of things on accounting we've already talked about here. Like, I don't think the Measure J feasibility study ought to be. And as a long time beef, if we're considering paying off the Rabo loan and considering that a water source loan, and why isn't the debt service in the indirect costs, which takes you to 17%, and then we have a problem.
Suresh, you want to address that?
Yes, so the first part of the question was why or how do we allocate the user fee to the water supply charge fund? So it gets allocated 1.2% of the total 8.325% that we collect on the user fee. So the total user fee that CalAm ratepayers pay the district is 8.325. Of that, 1.2% is carved out towards water supply charge fund or water supply fund. And that basically was dating back to when we were doing the ASR build out several years ago, maybe probably say about a decade ago. That's when the board took a action and basically allocated 1.2% to go to water supply. So we do allocate that 1.2% of the user fee. We carve it out and put it into the water supply fund. In terms of the debt service, that debt service is treated as a direct expense to the project or to the water supply fund because that loan was taken out directly in relation to the ASR project. We basically were short on cash and we started taking the district's reserve from other funds, the conservation and the mitigation fund, and we started building the ASR just to continue the project forward. But then when the opportunity was there for us to take out a loan, we did go ahead and take out the loan and then replenish the district's reserves, but also spent a chunk of it, majority of it, to complete the remainder of the ASR project. So ASR is treated as a water supply project, and so that's directly in relation to the water supply fund.
Yeah, John, I think interest expense on a capital borrowing is always considered a direct cost, not an indirect cost. But yeah, it's the nature of what Suresh is trying to get at.
His mic may be muted.
Jay,
Muted again.
I have
the Measure J part of it, the 380.
I have a question with regard to the pure water monitor.
No, you kind of cut out, John. Hang on, Paul. John was trying to finish a question about there's 384,000 allocated to Measure J that,
Right. So
that I
why
think
is
we talk
that?
about every meeting.
Why is that in the water supply board? So, and they got some a little bottom that's in there.
Suresh?
Yeah, that's the allocation of the total Measure J cost. That's just a 33%, which basically is allocated to the water supply charge fund. So that's why it's allocated towards the water supply fund, whether it be indirect or direct. I mean, that's a question up for discussion. The way we looked at internally is because Measure J is treated as the acquisition of the water system. Dave, you may want to chime on that.
Yeah, it falls right in there with election expenses and other things that, you know, we allocate across the 3 cost centers. And, you know, we continue to treat election expenses not indirect. And I think every time we meet as a group, it's those kind of expenditures that concern you as to whether they're direct or indirect. And obviously, the 12% cap, or is it 15%? Suresh, I can never remember.
15%.
Yeah, the 15% cap on indirect costs would get blown out of the water if we allocated these other pieces that we treat as direct. If we treat them as indirect here, you know, there's, you know, when we do these allocations, we basically say these are direct costs of each thing, you know, like the pension reserve. Well, we're reserving against people who work in the water supply planning function. Same with OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits. So, you know, those kinds of things have to get allocated to the people who work in them, and that's what's happening here. But I understand this level of discussion almost every time we meet as to what's direct and what's indirect.
If I can touch on this briefly as well, you know, if we're doing the ordinance oversight, the ordinance says that any project that these funds are going to be devoted to or used for need to be up and running and need to be identified by December 31st of 2017, with Measure J having rolled in 2018. So how can we possibly see funds from this going to something that didn't even exist at the cutoff date? Sorry to put you on the spot, but it really
No.
So
I don't have
the dates
that.
just speak for themselves to me.
Yeah, I don't have your email in front of me where you've got that section.
Section 10 of the ordinance.
Yeah, no, I know. You know, my understanding, well, I'll pull it up while we're having this discussion.
And also, just to look at it this way as well, it's basically not every expenses that's in the water supply fund gets paid out of the water supply charge revenue. As we had basically were discussing, is that the water supply fund is basically just a cost center for the district. But when we bring in the collections, the water supply charge revenue, the $3.4 million a year, I mean, if you look at just the Pure Water Monterey project or the ASR project over the years, I mean, if you do the calculation, you'll see that if you apply to those projects or even the local water project, if you add just the project cost, it's not enough to cover all of that, all of the direct, just the specific project cost. But because the way the district accounts for the project itself within the cost center, that's why everything gets thrown into the mix.
Yeah, but to the other part of John's question, which is, weren't projects upon which we're spending supposed to have been identified by December 31st of 2017? That's not quite what it says. Section 10C says, if no project is identified by that date, then let's unwind this thing. So conceptually, it was, hey, we got to get out and develop water supply. But if you don't get anything started by the end of 2017, or this other part, which is or if it's determined it's no longer needed, or if there's sufficient, to the extent alternative funds are available via a volumetric charge. So this was just basically saying, if you don't identify some project, you got to unwind this thing. It was never intended to say you could only spend it on projects that were identified before that date.
Well, I think that the water supply charge was created with an expectation that it would be sunset and there would be cutoffs and that projects would have to find other sources of funding so that the dual collection could go away. And what seems to actually have happened is that there's been a reliance on the dual funding, and the revenues of the district are at a point now where sunsetting this seems to be quite a challenge.
Well, yeah, I think there's kind of two pieces to that one. We're going to talk about it under item 4 about trying to establish a baseline, but under the letter of response to your letter, and have we built up a surplus or haven't we? The intent was absolutely to carry a water supply charge as long as we're still building water supply projects or funding water supply projects, which we are. And they've turned out to be far more expensive than we expected as well. But eventually it was envisioned that the water supply project expenditures would wind down because now you have the projects in place. And that would then afford you the chance to sunset it. But as long as we're still building and more than we collect in a year, that's where I talk about subsidies. We've had to subsidize the overall water supply fund from other sources of revenue just to make ends meet because we're spending so much on project expenses. That day will come when we're not, and that becomes the opportunity for sunset. But as I said, we'll talk more about that under item 4 as well.
I had a question with regard to Pure Water Monterey, the line item. Does that include both the initial project and the expansion project combined expenditures?
It included the $1 million, so the $750,000 that would have been our share of the $1 million that was authorized for study of the Pure Water Monterey expansion. Nothing more, no hard costs, no additional design and engineering, since nothing else authorized.
Okay. I would think that if moving forward, we'd want to, if we're going to put anything towards the expansion, we'd want to look at that as a separate item because there's some people concerned whether or not that's a real project. And so spending money on projects that are not real would probably raise greater concern than spending money on projects that are ongoing and actually producing. Also, the cost to put the initial water in the basin, the water that can't be pulled out, is that part of this $5 million? Is some of that in there?
It is. Yeah.
That's a rather substantial number to produce water and leave it in the ground.
Yeah, it's a couple $1 million for that 1,000 acre foot operating reserve. We're coming up on completion of that either right before the end of August or right after the beginning of September. Then all the deliveries will shift over to billable deliveries for customer service. So then we'll start invoicing CalAm for all the deliveries.
So then will those funds, I'm sorry, Paul, go ahead. And
John had brought up that date issue about projects in progress at a certain date.
Yeah.
And, in it didn't really, in my mind, negate what John was saying, that there is a slide that projects would be identified and proceeding, and not that if I did, if I went to the store and bought a bottle of water, now I'm good, I've started the project, anything for the next 20 years. That doesn't constitute a water project. So I do think it's us once again stressing we have serious issues with with Measure J and other things being brought in after the fact. So I think that point has been made a couple more times and even today. So there it is. All right,
Yep.
sorry.
Understood.
Hey, going back to the accounting, Suresh, how is it difficult or impossible to start breaking out the water supply charge? Uh, just so we can see it on a standalone basis, or maybe you already said that to me. We can, but it's just going to be then lumped into the 11 million down below.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the underlying question would be is what are you referencing to when you say break it out? I mean, you'd have to almost identify individual projects and say these projects only go towards the water supply charge. I mean, for example, if you pick out and say, okay, pure MRA and ASR project, then you just basically pick those two line items and basically say, these two projects are, calculate against the water supply charge line item. So it gets down to which line items or which project do we want to identify?
Right. Well, I'll tell you though, if somebody walked up to me and said, John, can you tell me that you were tracking the water supply charge and make sure that 85% of those funds are going to water projects and 15% are going to indirect? I can't really say that I can do that. So any help you can offer in getting me to that point so I can feel like I'm fulfilling the duties of this ordinance and this panel, I'd appreciate, your thought on that, please.
Yeah, and I think, in years like this, going back to what I discussed a little bit earlier, it's pretty straightforward that 3.4 million in last year's budget is less than the sum of Pure Water Monterey project and ASR phase 1. So there that at least in the current year, 100% of your water supply charge got expended on water supply projects. I think it starts to get messy if we get into years now where total project expenditures are only 1.8 million or something like that. And then it's like, okay, where's the rest of my 3.4 million going? Well, direct personnel, people assigned to the water supply project, or like in this case, Los Padres Dam long-term plan and other water supply projects, the modeling effort. Well, they're certainly related to water supply in the district and in the CalAm jurisdiction. They're a little fuzzier because they're not concrete and rebar, but the model is what's being used to develop the basin plan, which is a Bureau of Reclamation led study of the Salinas and Carmel watersheds together. So, again, still fully water supply related. So my starting point is always to go down to the project expenditures level and say, do I know what these projects are? Are they related to water supply? Do they exceed the collections of just the water supply charge themselves? And if they do, I'm kind of like, okay, then I'm highly confident the money's being spent in the right direction. It would be when they don't exceed it, then you have to start getting into what am I spending on direct personnel and services and supplies and things like that.
Well, maybe it's time for us to identify which projects we're funding here so that we can start to talk about a sunset as the projects themselves start to come and go off the project expenditures. Right. And really start to focus in on projects that were identified and existed before December 31st of 2017. Just a thought.
Yeah, and I would still get hung up on the second part of that, John, because again, taking, for example, the Los Padres Dam long-term plan or the flow models and the basin study, those kinds of things, there's always going to be something new related to our water supply and, modeling the water supply, managing the water supply, reporting on the water supply. So that's why, water supply charge, even though if you read the ordinance, it includes water demand, which is not water supply, it's conservation and other activities. We've done our best to limit it to things that are developing or managing the water supply for the district. But those types of things didn't necessarily exist before December 31st, 2017. And Dave Laredo, who, you know, bends words to his will as an attorney, would probably interpret Section 10 to say it was just a water supply project of any shape and size getting started by that date as an indicator that the district was serious about developing water supply opportunities. Not every project that gets paid for had to be in existence before that date.
This is Jason, if I may. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, John, I read your letter and I appreciated what you wrote. And I also did go to Section 10 to read what that, because that did seem like a clear-cut line date that I hadn't really paid attention to before. But when I read it, the words, the meaning wasn't clear to me. And as Dave just said, you know, perhaps David could can see clearly what that means, but I'm no attorney. So I didn't see that date as a hard and set date. I actually had trouble interpreting it myself. And just if I'm following this conversation correctly, if we add up all the actual water supply projects, they far exceed the water supply charge. And if we organize the accounting differently, we would still end up with at least a deficit as far as the water supply charge goes and funding water supply projects. Is that correct?
That is, yeah, that is
Or
correct. And so all it does is it reinforces that the day will come, and very likely soon in the next couple of years, where it may no longer be correct because we'll be done building things. We're probably not going to be done studying things, but we'll be done building things. And so you could get to the point where 3.4 million exceeds what we need. You know, we're no longer putting, so for the next 3 years, we have to put another 750 acre feet into the Pure Water Monterey operating reserve. So that's going to be a significant expenditure, but then that goes away unless it has to get tapped to meet the delivery requirements. So if you tap it, then you got to refill it. So those kinds of things will continue to exist. Some of the studies will continue to exist, but if you get, you know, if you get all those project expenditures down, then you have to go back and look at, okay, what are we expending on the personnel and services and so forth? You know, what's my real nut? And then also, and we'll talk about this with the user fee, as a user fee, as a percentage, as a CalAm bill goes up, the same percentage will collect more. So at what point do you have a reliable surplus of the user fee that you can begin to apply against the water supply charge? So two things should happen. One is your water supply charge needs go down and your user fee surplus goes up, both of which in combination should allow you to begin sunsetting. But the nature of my letter in response to John Tilley was, to date, we haven't accumulated any excess in the water supply charge. So there's no fund of water supply charge surplus out there. And then item 4 will be, we seem to be just barely at the point of user fee surplus that we can start thinking in these terms, but we'll get to that when we get there on the agenda.
Dave, was that letter, did you share that letter with all of us, or? I don't remember reading
perhaps it. Not, Jason. Afterwards, I know Arlene has a copy, so Arlene, if you could just remember to put on your to-do list to send it out to the full committee. I think a few people have seen it. John, you saw it. But yeah, we'll get it to the.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought I did, but I may have just sent it to the same distribution list that John had or something.
Well, I received John's letter, but Okay.
I should have,
All right,
I should have
thank you.
forwarded that. I didn't. I just sent the original.
Yeah, Arlene will get it out to the group after the meeting.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So moving on to item related to user fee collections. Item 3.
Okay.
So there's a chart in the packet basically shows the collection through May. We just received the June numbers today, which was a little over 500,000. It was 515,000. So for the entire year, you'll see towards the just below the graph are the numbers that basically go towards the collection. So you'll see through May, we had collected $4.8 million. Now with the 500,000, it's going to take us to 5.3, close to $5.4 million. So we definitely are above collection from last fiscal year. But as you can see, if you go back to 17-18 number, you'll see it was $5 million. Then 18-19 went down to 4.7, and so this year is like 5.3 and some change. So that's still kind of like fluctuating about several $100,000 plus or minus. So we can't really say that every year it's going to increase. This year turned out to be better. Don't know where 2021 is, but we continue to track this. But just to reiterate it, that the entire $5 million that's collected on user fee does not get allocated to a water supply charge. 1.2% of whatever is collected gets allocated to water supply charge fund.
Yeah, and interestingly, what we're going to discover as we look at item 4 is if we had expected this year's collections of the user fee to materialize compared to what Suresh has budgeted to expect for next year, there is an extra $1 million. And if we can get to the place where we know reliably what to expect to recover from the user fee, then there's far more surplus in there that could be applied to sunset the water supply charge. What we're trying to avoid, though, is yo-yoing, where in a really good year we reduce the water supply charge. I mean, well, first of all, you have to do this proactively in the budget cycle, because that's when you're setting your rates and charges. So if we reduced the user fee or reduced the water supply charge in the expectation that the one or the other was going to be at a certain level higher than the previous year, and it doesn't happen, then you've under collected. So where we're trying to get to is an understanding that the user fee is consistently always going to be at least at this certain level, and what the user fee has to pay for first is well understood, and then all the rest can go to sunset the water supply charge. And I just don't think we're there yet, but I'm kind of segueing into item 4.
Dave?
The important thing on this chart.
Dave, can I ask a question?
Yeah, John.
Why do you think the user fee is up so much? Because everybody from San Francisco came down and used their second homes? It certainly isn't the hotels.
Yeah, it's a mystery to me, because the just for the COVID shelter in place period, April was the only month where water demand here on the peninsula was significantly less than the prior 4 years. Yet these April collections in green on this chart are higher than the prior 2 years. So there are things that we don't have an audit trail, and there's some things that are just counterintuitive like that make no sense. And the fact that we're going to see a significantly higher collection than budget for last year, yet for the coming year we're budgeting lower than what we budgeted last year due to expectations that revenues are falling off. I don't have a good answer for you. We really don't know well enough what's going on inside. And it could be that volumetric water use is down in the commercial setting, but the fixed meter charges remain solid because they're fixed. And so we may have collected good solid fixed meter charges for larger size meters, which is good revenue on the commercial side, even though their volumetric water demand went down. But, you know, it's, at least in April, we knew that three things happened. It rained in April, so irrigation demand was down. The Big Sur Marathon got canceled, and Pebble Beach Food and Wine got canceled. So we've got an explanation for why the volumetric portion of April would be down, because demand was significantly down, over 100 acre feet over the prior year. But then, you know, you look at the collections, and it may be that what we're seeing here that we're attributing to April is actually part March, part April. You know, the company has a standard billing cycle that's like 27 days to 35 days or something like that. So sometimes the billing cycles get off and your revenue doesn't really reflect an apples to apples comparison. But
I have a question. I was wondering, is there user fee based on a percentage of the bill of the resident? Is that correct?
yeah, exactly.
Because it seems to me, and this is just anecdotal, there's no science to it, but for the last few months, it seems like everybody has said their water bill has skyrocketed. And I mean, hundreds and hundreds of dollars over. And I'm wondering if that had anything to do with it.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, Patty, because you know, we are 8.325% of not surcharges, just water sales and fixed meter charge. And we heard the same thing in February and March of this year. Everybody's bill seemed to go up. And I think it had something to do with the surcharges, though. And we don't collect on the surcharges. But if, in fact, the new rates kicked in right around that time, and I can go back and actually look, then you're right, your revenues would just go up with the rate increase. And that's quite possible, because I heard the same thing. People were asking, and we were checking to see if there were new surcharges on the bills and what have you.
If people are staying at home, using more water, would they be also possibly to different tiers and therefore higher prices for the same amount of water?
Yeah, John, that's what we're seeing. So unfortunately, you know, talking to Chris Cook at Cal-Am, we can't get the monthly data on a monthly basis. They're only willing to give it to us at the end of the year so we can see how the monthly changes between non-residential and residential happen. But clearly more people are staying home, washing cars, doing loads of laundry, planting gardens, you know, things like that. And that would have an impact as well. So this is, you know, and this is part of the reason why back in 2016, our board said, collect them both for 3 years so you can figure out what's predictable and what's not. I think we're getting pretty close to figuring out what's predictable, at least seasonally. But yeah, it's these other, all the things that you said are true. If your rates go up, then our user fee would go up. If water use goes up, our user fee would go up.
Dave, I had one point I wanted to make, and that was that, you know, when that last rate increase, they definitely changed tier 1 to a much higher rate, didn't they? Change tier 1, and they wanted to get most of the reimbursement out of tier 1. So I do think residential people may be paying a little bit more, just not even using a whole lot more. They're paying more.
And I think, not to get down into the 100, yeah, I think the unit is CGL, which is 100-gallon units. And I do think tier 1 and tier 2 went up to like 29.9 CGLs in each of those tiers, where just a year ago it was more like 18 or 19. So you're right, you'd be pushing higher costs on the same amount of water use at the lower tiers. Anything else? Questions or comments? Okay,
gonna
let's
be
move on
interesting
to item 4. And Arlene, if you would go first to the exhibits. And for those of you who have them in front of you, Exhibit 4A is a current bill. So this is, after Ordinance 152 and then negotiation with the PUC and all the noticing provisions. And I've highlighted the MPWMD user fee down a little bit lower. And the caption's a little bit off. They rounded to 8.33. It's actually 8.325%. But it would be that percentage on the what's called the water service charge and the water usage charge, the sum of those two up above, and that's it. So we don't get calculations on any of these other charges. It's just actual water use. Now going to the next exhibit, before the user fee got reinstated, we had 2 items on the CalAm bill, neither of which was the user fee. So the user fee had gotten thrown out, but because the PUC recognized the importance of the river mitigation program, they allowed a mitigation surcharge to be imposed. And down at the bottom, MPWMD conservation surcharge, which was paying for about 1.5 people on our staff through the CalAm bill, and also all the shower heads and aerators and giveaways that we do, all the equipment. So when the user fee was reinstated, part of the deal, part of the bargain was these surcharges would go away, but the expenses that these surcharges were funding did not go away. So the whole nature of the staff note was basically to give you guys a sense, as well as it'll eventually be in front of my board, actually probably in the next month or 2, is in order to start thinking about sunsetting the water supply charge, it will have to come from a surplus of user fees. And the example in the staff note basically said, okay, if you took what used to be paid for in the conservation surcharge, what the mitigation program surcharge is supposed to cover, and put them in current year dollars and compare them to the current year budget, right now there'd only be about 200,000 of excess. Previously, when talking about the user fee, I did say, well, if we knew that it was going to come in at the level that it looks like it is for the previous fiscal year, 5.2 to 5.3 total million, well, then there'd be, $1 million in excess. So at some point, we want to have a predictable amount of excess over the baseline of paying for what the conservation surcharge and the mitigation surcharge used to pay for. And I guess what I'm telling you is right now we're not there, but we're getting really close. And so as either CalAm rates go up or usage goes up or what have you, the user fee revenues, if there's economic recovery, should start to consistently produce an excess. And then that's what we would target to do any sunset of the water supply charge on the other side. But it's going to take a long time to get to a $3.4 million excess in user fees to completely offset the collection of the water supply charge. And then keep in mind that there are certain water supply functions that may never go away that might be worthwhile to keep a portion of the water supply charge still going. So, those are the things that we're going to have to wrap together in a plan going forward. But I guess the takeaway is we're just not quite there yet.
It looks like the conservation surcharge has tripled over the last 5 years. Is that right?
No, it was always half of the permit, half of one of our or full 100% of one of our inspectors and half of our admin person, plus the shower heads and aerators. I can tell you that this number hasn't changed much in 3 years. I don't know, going all the way back to the water bill.
Just reading the bill, the conservation surcharge is, it looks like 2.45 cents 5 years ago, and now it's 7.5 cents. So that's a tripling.
Oh, that's the Cal-Am conservation surcharge, Dave. That's based
Yeah,
funding
you're
all
right,
the
you're right.
rebates and stuff.
So there used to be two surcharges. So on the oldest bill, you can see there's what's called conservation surcharge. That's the second other charge. And then the MPWMD conservation surcharge. So on the newer bill, the second to last page, it's that conservation surcharge is the same Cal-Am conservation surcharge. So you're right, it's gone up quite a bit. Look at that. 0.0751 versus 0.025. So yeah, 3 times. But that's not our program. That's Cal-Am's programs.
And question, can we measure our conservation surcharge as well? Did ours go back that far, or what's on the other one, but it's not on this one?
Right. And so for a number of years, probably 15, 20 years, we had a conservation surcharge that was collected by Cal-Am, and then monthly they'd remit that portion to us for our, so we were able to budget against it and spend it. Part of the deal of getting the user fee back, the user fee is much more akin to what we call a utility user tax, or a UUT. City of Monterey has one. I think City of Pacific Grove has one. Those are voter approved taxes on the local utilities bill. And they are held by the courts to be for the purview of the public agency. They're just a revenue, either approved or in our case, because we can set rates and charges without voter approval, but nevertheless, for the normal functions of government, just like franchise fees are as well. And you look at these bills, you can see there's a franchise fee. So if you go to the newer bill, down at the bottom, you see a county franchise taxes. So unfortunately, this one's unincorporated county, so you're not going to see like City of Pacific Grove and City of Carmel get a 2% franchise fee. And they also get like a business license tax fee in Pacific Grove. In the City of Monterey, they have the utility user tax. And so these are various ways that the government taxes your utilities. Just like when you look at your cable bill and there's an FCA fee and, just a whole variety of things on your telephone bill. So what the courts determined is a user fee or a utility user tax is something that goes to the general functions of the government. And in our case, the Supreme Court determined that our various functions can change year in and year out, but we clearly demonstrated that we've been doing the environmental mitigation since the early 80s, and that we've shifted between conservation. And one year we were doing rationing, so we had a additional rationing surcharge. But the courts determined that it's effectively not the PUC's not within the PUC's purview to make judgments as to how it was going to be used. And that's what led to them reinstating it, which is, okay, fine. But part of that was then we as the district said, well, we don't want to have 3 surcharges. We want to have a single surcharge that says, we're your government, we're taking our share, and we're applying it to the things that we do. And so that's why we took the mitigation program charge and the conservation surcharge off, fully knowing that the new replacement user fee was going to have to cover those programs and then some. And that's kind of how we got here. But you know, our conservation surcharge, you know, we made the internal decision that we should be paying for our own people through our own revenue source, rather than Cal-Am collecting a surcharge to call their own and then turn around and remit it to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the story of what is our baseline.
After Dave, after looking at this item 4, discussing item 4, my opinion is that this water supply charge will never go away. I know that seems drastic to state that, but I bet if we polled members of this committee, most of them would probably say the same thing, that they have little faith that it's going to go away, ever. One way maybe to start trying to steer the ship that way is to set goals, set a time frame, set something. You know, I don't know if the board is really committed to making this go away. Maybe have they set a policy towards making this happen? Or
yeah, so they in April of 2016 adopted a policy that wasn't even able to be implemented until basically July of 2017 because the PUC dragged their feet. But it was collect them both for 2 years and then start sunsetting either or both. So in other words, you know, we as a governmental agency shouldn't just be collecting all the money we can possibly collect and then invent ideas about what to do with it. Conceptually, you know, as I said before, if we're going to spend less of current dollars on water supply projects, then we should be freeing up some room to sunset a portion of the water supply charge. Similarly, you know, let's face it, if the desal plant came online and your water service charges almost doubled, meaning our user fee would almost double. Well, there's another case where we'd basically be forced to say, well, we can't, I mean, it's great to have money. We all like to have more money and we'd like to build our reserves to a certain level, but you know, within a year or two of doing that, your reserves are even beyond what they need to be. So instead of authorizing the user fee at 8.325%, we could either leave it authorized at 8.325% and completely wipe out the water supply charge, or you could sunset a portion of both. You know, it's that type of thing. And those are the, in the policy that was adopted in 2016, that's basically what the board said they would like to hear after 3 years of simultaneous collection. Then how are you going to start pulling back on the throttle on both of these? And I think the analysis that I showed you just basically says we're just getting there where we can even begin to think about it.
I guess I'm thinking that this analysis shows that not only to barely beginning to think about it, that they're not going to make any progress at it anytime soon. Maybe I'm just being a little negative about it, but I would hope to find some sort of greater, you know, emphasis on that policy. Maybe set actual, you know, time frame, set actual targets, something, or else it's never going to happen. Because to say out of all the money there that we only have about 200,000 that might be excess at this point just seems like it's no one's trying.
Right. Well, I think, Paul, one of the answers would be if, and this is something that I think is doable, is if you budget the user fee, like in our case, let's say budgeted at 4.2 million. Actually, what did we budget it at? Let's see.
It's 4.25.
Yeah, 4.25 million. And let's say we have a great year and 5 million comes in, similar to this past year that's just ending. Well, there's 750,000 you hadn't counted on. A policy that says we're going to take 2/3 of that and use that to buy down the water supply charge in the subsequent budget year is something that makes sense. I mean, you need to be able to do it kind of ahead of time so that if you're wrong, you're not left short. But I guess that's what I'm saying. We could have a policy that says, yeah, you budget the user fee at this. The user fee is covering expenses in 3 different cost centers. Expenses that need to be covered. But you've got them covered as long as your budgeted user fees come in. So if user fees come in way over budget, let's use that as a down payment on sunsetting the water supply charge in a subsequent year.
Perfect. I'd like to second your motion. Was that a motion, or do I need to make that as a motion, as a recommendation?
Well, so Paul, and where you draw the lines are, and this is the issue that we've raised before, the district is always resetting priorities as well. And so if on the one hand, you want us to pay down our unfunded liabilities for pension and post-employment benefits, well, that's going to add a use for the user fee, which will take away some of the surplus. So, that's where I kind of said, well, if you get a surplus in a year, maybe you target a portion of it against the water supply charge because you may have these other priorities, or you may have shortfalls. But the concept, I think, is very doable.
Well, I guess the question to the committee, it would be, would we want to make a recommendation proposing something like that with a certain percentage? So that way there's something that sort of automatically starts to take place if it hits that trigger. We have more coming in not the rainy day fund, it goes to the, getting rid of the water supply charge fund, or whatever you want to call it. I can't say it as eloquently as you did, but I would think that other committee members, if they were unmuted, would hopefully, with a similar, support or something like that.
Don't we have to pay off the bank?
Say again, John?
Don't we have to worry about paying off the bank first?
Yeah. So, but think about it. Like in this budget that Suresh just presented to us, we've got $500,000 going into a sinking fund, which, by the way, is not enough. I think we calculated we needed about 980,000 in each of the next 3 years to fully be ready to pay off the sinking fund. But so we'll be budgeting deposits to the sinking fund in the next couple of years. But you're right. If we balance the budget with a contribution to the sinking fund to pay off the bank loan, and you still get excess revenues in the user fee, then I think you still have that flexibility to grab a bunch of it and say, all right, for next year, that's going to buy down what your expectation is for the water supply charge. I don't know, Suresh, does any of this work for you?
It does, but just keep in mind that, for example, we budgeted 4.25 for user fee. Let's just say theoretically, if it comes at $5 million, well, you've created that 750 surplus, but remember, only 1.2% of the user fee gets allocated to the water supply charge. The remainder is to the mitigation and conservation. And again, when we balanced our budget for 2021, the mitigation and the conservation fund were drawing some reserves from their cost center as well to balance the budget. I mean, remember, we took a hard line on this revenue side and we said, hey, look, other years we were anticipating a $5 million user fee. Let's just take the COVID-19 effect onto the budget and just see what the budget's going to be. And so that's why we reduced the user fee 15%, which went down to 4.2. So if it comes in, If it comes in, yeah, just keep in mind that a portion of that 750 surplus gets allocated to water supply charge.
Yeah, yeah. But it still sounds doable, because I think, you know, I agree with Paul that, you know, we've got all these tools. Our goal is to remain as flexible as possible. So we may not deauthorize any of it, but annually as part of the budget process, you say, well, we're authorized at, you know, 3.4 million at the water supply charge, but this year we're only going to budget and establish it on the assessor's bill at a level that's, you know, 2.6 million. So you've sunset a portion of it. Similarly, on the user fee, we can hit a point where we're authorized at 8.325%, but we're only this budget year going to set it at 7.125%. You know, those are the tools that we'll have as long as we're highly confident that at the new levels, we still are at or above what we budgeted. And that's the game that we have to play going forward. But then, you know, as time passes, you should be able to sunset more and more of the water supply charge. But Paul and others, when I say the desire is to have flexibility, from a bonding standpoint, that water supply charge, you've seen how consistent it is. So it's a very predictable revenue source. So if we were to do, you know, another water supply project that required bonding, we'd want to do it over in the water supply charge spot. You've seen the variability in the user fee. That doesn't give you as much comfort as you're trying to meet rate covenants or what's called debt service coverage under your bond covenants, where you always have to have your revenues after payment of O&M has to be, like, just as an example, 1.25% of your debt service. Well, if you've got a variable source of revenue, you run the risk of it not being 1.25, but being 1.2% or 1.15%. And so you violated a bond covenant. If you've got a real secure source of revenue, like the water supply charge, you're highly likely to maintain that rate covenant and the debt service coverage. So, you know, when the future comes and we want to re-access it, it makes more sense from the district's perspective to leave it intact and just deauthorize it on an annual basis or reduce it. So that's, you know, those are the tools that we want our board to have, but we also want them to have the incentive to actually show progress, to offset Paul Bruno's cynicism just a little bit, to make a happy, warm, sunshiny place so that Paul sees progress in his lifetime. We agree with it. We'd like to make some progress. It's a promise that we made to the public, whether it was a smart promise or not a smart promise. Remember, it was compromised. And Paul, you said your organization wasn't going to sue us if we did it, and you sued us anyway. But we have to honor that promise, you know, when we can.
Dave,
So I have a question.
excuse me, don't you reach the happy medium if you take, rather than reduce the water supply charge, at least for the next few years, if you just use the excess to pay off that loan, and until you get the loan totally paid off, we shouldn't think about lowering the water supply charge. After that, when the books are clean, you know, then we can consider Paul. But we're basically doing what we do if we're paying off the loan.
Yeah, John.
That's progress for Paul.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that you know, we just need to keep in mind that if we have if we have a big surprise, if we have more revenue than expected, that it's a priority to increase the amount in the sinking fund for paying off the Mechanics Bank loan, because we know we're still a little short in this year's budget as to what we should have put in there. So you're absolutely right, John. And it has the same impact because until we're in a position to pay off that loan, the water supply charge is its security. So what you guys want in order to sunset would be to get rid of anything that requires it to remain in existence. And that's your biggest one right now is that loan.
So I have a question, Dave.
Yes.
If I did my math,
Yeah, is it Scott?
yeah. So am I coming through okay, or am I all garbled?
No, you're
More
pretty
than
good.
usual.
John got a little garbled there, but
Okay. So do I understand this correctly? I did the math that the Water Management District adds 16.55% to my water costs. Notice I didn't say water bill, water costs through the water supply charge on my property taxes and the user fee on my bill. 8.225 and 8.325. Is that right?
yeah, it sounds a little high, but the concept is correct.
So, and I just want to remind you and Dave Laredo that, and what you said, you alluded to it just a minute ago, that in the discussion we had on this fee back in whenever it was, the compromise was, well, the initial layout was, we need this because the user fee is going away. And when the user fee comes back, this will go away. And then the board extended it 3 years to July of 2020. So and Paul is, I think he might be on the right path to cynicism in the fact that I could see that in 4 months from now or 6 months or a year from now, the Water Management District Board might say, you know what, this fee is just too important. And it's 16 and something percent added to my water costs right on top. So just I want to make that point. I was part of that fight or that discussion back whenever it was. And I remember vividly the assurances that the then board made to all of us out there in the audience about when this would sunset and what would happen. And my board asked me on a regular basis, hey, what do you think about the 152 ordinance? And I said, sunsetting. And I was like, I don't know if it's ever going to happen. So I'm gaining a little pessimism along with Paul. Maybe I hang around with Paul too much. I don't know.
Yeah, it's Scott, it's close to about 13 point something percent.
Ah, okay. So what's the water supply charge on our property tax bill? Because it's consistent for
it's this year. It appears to be about 5.4%. Remember, it's done.
Okay, so
it's done with a huge allocation structure where a cemetery gets X per acre, a single family home of a certain size gets X, if mid-size gets Y, large size gets Z, and a bar and restaurant. So everybody's different.
Sure. I got that. Okay, just checking. I just want to make sure that, so my math is wrong. It's 13. I would check my property taxes to see what the percent. I think they actually put a percentage on there.
Do they?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'll check it.
No, it's a fixed dollar on the property tax bill.
Yeah, it's usually on that second page of, line items. But
okay.
But I think that this discussion, what John Bottomley says is absolutely true, that everything you can do to position yourself to pay off the Mechanics Bank loan on time frees you up from the handcuffs of having to have the water supply charge and works in that direction. Budgeting so that we're more likely to receive a surplus of user fee than a deficit in the user fee is probably a good principle. And then we can pair the actual results, if it is a surplus, with further, like subsequent budget year, trying to downsize or sunset a portion of the water supply charge, which I think makes policy sense. And then we just need to eyeball, as rates increase, the user fee will generate more revenue. We can either back off the user fee or take that revenue and back off the water supply charge. Then eventually you would hit a point where if rates have gotten so high and the user fee is generating more than 3.4 million of surplus to completely offset the water supply charge, then yeah, conceivably that's your day in the sun set where the water supply charge is completely gone. And in August, we would tell the assessor, this year we want you to collect 0, and here's the data file for that. And we'd be budgeting that back in May, June of that same year, so we would know it's coming. But those lines aren't going to cross, for a while. But they're starting to move in that direction.
I'm going to try to lower my hand.
Yeah, one at a time. Who's that?
This is Jason. I just wanted to say, I originally, when I got on this oversight committee, I looked at the water supply charge as kind of the camel's nose under the tent. Once it's under there, it's probably going to just keep pushing in. But I just want to share, encourage Paul and I guess Scott that hey, I never thought FORA would go away, so stranger things have happened. Just want to point that out.
That's good. Excuse me, I have to leave. I have another meeting I have to go to. I let Arlene know that, so
Okay.
I didn't cut out, but.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. We're almost done anyway. This has been mostly an update, but I think Paul and John have given us some direction so that this issue is going to come back to our board, as I mentioned, either a month or 2 months from now. So this kind of guidance is helpful.
Tilly, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. It's always interesting for me to hear entities talk about revenues increasing to fill gaps and ignoring the expense side. I get it though; it's really hard to cut expenses sometimes in certain organizations. But when I look at this, the project expenditures, what we're being told is, and it clearly is, where the water supply charge is going. Is it possible to look through the, let's say, 10, 12 expenditures that are there, look at the ones that are most likely near-term reductions and tie the sunset to those going away so that, it becomes somewhat concrete? We are, now that project expenditure XYZ is going away, we're able to cut less of the water supply charge. That's just one concept to consider.
No, John, it's a good concept. I think, in our minds, we probably cut the subsidies from other revenue sources first. And then if you can keep going, then you cut the water supply charge. But the desire to pair water supply revenue to water supply expenditures remains pretty strong. And as you go back to Exhibit 2C, this goes back to what you were saying before. All the revenues are lumped together, but if we could get all the revenues from capacity fee and project reimbursement and water master reimbursement, property tax is a real good example. If we can get all those to go to 0, and then further reduce the water supply charge, I mean, that would be the direction. But we'd like to get out of the business of heavy expenditures on projects that we have to subsidize with our other revenues. And we've just not been able to do that. And we've had so many carryovers, as Suresh walked you through there. We moved a bunch of expenditures from last year into this year, but I think we're finally getting close to completion, which will allow that concept to happen where, you identify that project and that project, and at the end of this current budget year, they're going to be gone. And so now start looking at that impact on the water supply charge. Can we reduce it in the subsequent budget year? I get what you're saying. It makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think that whether it's desal or water Monterey, no matter what water is getting pumped, it's going to be more expensive.
Anyone else have anything? We've got a kind of catch-all item on the agenda if you wanted to talk about any of the projects. I think there's not a whole lot of progress being made anywhere other than waiting on the Coastal Commission hearing on the 17th of September. Keep in mind, if they do get their development permit, then somebody's got to go to Judge Villarreal and get her to remove the restraining order on the unincorporated county permit. But, you know, that session will probably reveal a lot. You may have seen that our district sent a letter to the state board saying, hey, look, we're not going to make December 31st, 2021. So let's talk about extending the cease and desist order. Planning and Conservation League, our friend Jonas Minton immediately sent a letter saying, no, that's a really bad idea. The community can absorb a penalty for missing a milestone this year. And they're very close to being able to meet the CDO with legally available supplies based on recent pumping and don't budge. So that was not necessarily a helpful letter from the community standpoint. Our view is that even if we could afford a missed milestone and a reduction in the limits on the Carmel River for the next water year, that if we don't have to, why should we? And there is an element of the cease and desist order that says the deputy director for water rights can waive the penalty if it's outside the hands of the company, the district, and the mayor's authority. Mayor's authority is going away at the end of August. So, you know, it's really just down to the stewardship of the company and the district. And, you know, as I've said, the coronavirus has already crushed the economy. Even if a missed milestone penalty wouldn't crush us, it is quite possible that going to the end of 2021 and having to meet simply the legal limit on the Carmel River could hurt us. And so, you know, we're 18 months away from that, or 20 months away from that. It's time we begin discussion, because it's that end of the CDO deadline, the December 31st, 2021, which is the most onerous. But nevertheless, it's always better to have more water than less water, which is why we said waive the penalty if we miss this milestone in September, which we will. As a community, we will. So that's going on there. Pure Water Monterey, there's pretty much agreement among all parties that we need to explore 1 or 2 additional wells. We've got a drilling team out there to do borings of 2 already approved sites next week. A decision will get made based on the geology, whether it's worthwhile trying to develop both or just one, and whether we could get any cost savings by bidding both at the same time versus doing one now and discovering you want to do another one a year from now. We will meet our, we had 6 months between our first injections to reach a performance start date, which is, it appears now that we will meet that 6-month period and begin deliveries for customer service for delivery to your door or your tap first week of September. So that's moving. And then the ASR chemical building is shaping up really nicely. So that site should get buttoned up this year. The only other area of concern is we've got a pipeline that's about 1.3 miles that will provide greater flexibility to extract Pure Water Monterey water while still injecting Carmel River water up in the same area within, you know, 1.5 miles of each other. And that proposal was to be certified at our last board meeting, and it got pulled because of concerns expressed by Marina Coast Water District. Marina Coast Water District's concerns are that while they recognize it improves flexibility for ASR operations, you could put desal water in it, and anything that makes the desal project work any better is anathema to Marina Coast Water District, so they want to fight us on our EIR addendum, which we're using to protect the efficacy of ASR. So the hijinks continue. But if you have any specific questions about what's going on in the water supply area, please feel free to ask them. And your colleague, Karen Paul, just announced she wants to run for our board, which, good luck to you. Retirement's supposed to be like hiking and.
Karen, you're muted.
Oh, you're muted, Karen. There you are. Oh, do it again. One more time. Arlene, can you unmute her?
Buzz.
Yeah, you kind of broke up a little bit there.
So now can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, as you said, oh yes, retirement. Well, I guess I flunked retirement, or maybe I wasn't quite ready to retire. But no, I still have, hopefully this will, I'm sure it will engage me if, well, certainly running a campaign for the first time in my life is a new adventure, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll end up having a lot of folks who want to help you. Yours could actually be one of the more interesting races. I know Jeff, your colleague, Jeff Davey, was inquiring about the election process for the same division. And I know that there's one other stated candidate who's been coming to a lot of our meetings. So, it's potentially a 3-person race, which would be, I think, unheard of in recent years for the water district.
I didn't know about the third person. Jeff Davey, you say?
Well, Jeff is co-chair of the Coalition of Peninsula Businesses with John Tilley. And I know he's been, what do we want to call it, snooping around to figure out what the election process is and how late you have to file for candidacy. But he may, I don't know what the handicapping is on Rudy Fisher, but it sounds like Rudy wants to run as well. So there'll be a whole lot of discussion. We've got till mid-August, I think.
Well, that's good to know. I had heard Rudy Fisher was going to run. I had not heard about the potential third. I think that, it's August 7th is the last date to file, except if the incumbent is not running, they add on a few days. So
right, and that's
a couple more weeks. We'll know.
It'll all reveal itself. And John Tilley will reveal nothing, right?
If I knew something, I would tell you what it was, Dave.
Okay.
Yeah. I do want to verify this, Dave. I heard a quote: "Better to have more water than less water."
Unless it's really, really, really not needed for 50 years.
What about maybe 15 years? I'm not going to put you on the spot. I will erase that quote. That was right. It's all gone. Never mind. No waters but good water. Wait, that's not good either, though. That's not a very good quote.
All right, folks. If there are no more questions or comments, we very much appreciate your input. And we're getting closer to the mission of paying things off and sunsetting. I do believe we are. The 3 things that I heard from you guys today will get translated to our presentation to the board in a month or 2. So,
thank you, Dave.
Dave, I just wanted to say I pretty much agree with everything we talked about today in a general sense. I did want to ask you, given the current rate case before the PUC, do you have any anticipated idea about increased income for the district from that might affect decisions coming down?
yeah, so interestingly, part of the problem I'm foreseeing is in the first year of the rate case, And actually next calendar year, or this current upcoming year, the cost of pure water Monterey is going to be thrown onto your bill as a purchase water surcharge. If it remains a purchase water surcharge in subsequent years, then it never makes it to the top of the bill, which is the service charge and the volumetric charge. It stays down as a surcharge. And so the district's user fee is only being calculated on those top two lines. The game that gets played, and you and Karen can go out for coffee sometime and learn all about the way the game gets played. But there are things that the investor-owned utilities can do, which makes it look like the rates aren't going up as much. And that's by keeping things in surcharges. We want things that you know you're going to have to pay for year in and year out to find their way into the base rates. And so this general rate case isn't clear. This general rate case is riddled with all sorts of surcharges, and we're not sure when they'll go away or whether, you know, some of them will remain permanent. So we don't really know how that's going to affect our 8.325%.
Also,
yeah.
Also, this current rate case is woefully delayed from the anticipated timeline. We, at the moment, it appears may not have hearings until perhaps November. And ordinarily, they would like to have had this to the commission for decision so that the rates can be implemented sometime in January. I would anticipate that they're not going to be able to implement the new rates until close to the end of this fiscal year. And along the same line, that probably means that there will be a surcharge for the collected increase, and that will not be subject to the district's fee.
Wow. And there's no hope that that rate structure is going to change at all and surcharges are going to be differently approached. I know they are. Some of the things I've read have been pretty ugly about adding charges that they've already gotten reimbursed for and things like that.
The surcharge process, it's a question of degree, not of kind. So we have to live with the surcharge process.
So I'll give you one more little anecdote. And this is not intended to pick on Karen's former employer, but maybe to pick on the mentality of your investor-owned utilities a little bit. So the PUC allows or defines a billing cycle to be something like 27 to 35 days or 25 to 30 something, but you know, approximately a month. I have no reason to believe Cal-Am's ever done this, but I do know of one utility in particular that over the course of 2 years, if they keep their billing period down to that 27 days, you can pick up an extra billing period in a 2-year cycle. And if you're charging fixed charges for, you know, basically your meter charge, you get to collect an extra month's worth of meter charges over 2 years. So over time, you begin to find every little pocket of money and every little balancing account trick and every little surcharge versus rate to just, you know, benefit your revenue collection, and you get good at it. And it gets very difficult and convoluted for the layperson to figure out what's going on all the time. The bill that you see for the second to last page in this packet, I'm pretty sure if you do the math on the Public Utilities Commission surcharge or the county franchise tax, they're supposed to be computed on the revenues of the utility, but they seemingly have taken the revenues of the utility and added the district's user fee to that, and then computed the other two remaining surcharges with the district's user fee in there. Well, our user fee is supposed to be a pass-through. It's not a revenue of the utility. And under the California Franchise Act, it's only supposed to be the revenues of the utility. So, you know, we've raised this in the current rate case as well, and supposedly somebody's looking at it. But these are just the things that you know, that either happen because no one noticed it, or happened because someone noticed it. And, you know, it's an impossibly complex process. And, you know, we do our best.
Susan, you're not on.
Yep.
Thank you, Dave.
All right. Anything else? Let's call it a day. It's a long one. Appreciate all your questions and comments. And I do think this is always a good time to get people together and just kind of talk about what's going on in water in general. So I appreciate you indulging me your time.
Thank you, Dave.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you, Dave. Thank you, Arlene.
Yep. Thanks, Steph.
Thank you, everybody.
Buddy, appreciate it.
Thank you.